This watch is a GMT Master 2. It's a Pepsi. It was used for its whole life by a welder. He wore it every day. It's taken quite a lot of abuse. The owner decided to retire, and as you see, all that weld, that is Weld Splatter. That is fixed tight to the case. I was pleased when this watch came in because recently we did an Explorer 1, and it was covered in soil from a vegetable patch, and we had a lot of people accusing us of putting the soil on the watch, and it was a genuine repair, but we got that sick of answering comments about soil on the watch. The soil really wasn't a big part of the repair. It was very quick to get off, but people really seemed to focus on it, and some people were quite rude about it as well. So when this one came in covered in weld, and that's some gloss paint there as well, I thought great, because it's very hard to accuse us of covering a watch in weld splatter. I don't think many people are going to take a £15,000 Rolex and cover it in weld splatter for a video. But yeah, these things do happen to these watches. They do get abused, and we do see quite a lot of them. So we do see some that have had a lot of abuse, and this is one. Well, abuse is perhaps the wrong word. They are tool watches. They're designed for this sort of thing. And the great thing about Rolex is the steel's so good that you can get them looking great again. As you will see in this video, by the end of it, it will look much better. We don't like to strip the character from watches. We do like to leave some of the originality. So the worst parts of this watch are the glass, the bracelet and the case. They're where we're going to focus our attention, along with a movement service obviously. But the bezel, the dial and the hands will all stay as they are. You can see quite a lot of dirt under this bezel. It's amazing how much dirt can collect inside a watch. If you ever buy a watch used, it's a great idea to get it at least ultrasonically cleaned under the bezel and in the bracelet. If you put a steel bracelet in a clean ultrasonic tank and press the on button, you'll see how quickly the dirt comes pouring out of the bracelet. And since I've been working on watches and cleaning watches, I would never wear a used watch without thoroughly cleaning it first. The dial and hands are actually in great condition underneath there. This watch is a good candidate for a restoration actually. By the time we're done, it should be looking good. There's even some weld splatter on the back there. That is weld splatter, so I imagine the owner got a burnt arm with that one. Inside, see, we've already loosened the back, so just get that off. The movement's not in too bad shape. You get the usual that you get with Rolex automatic watches, is that when owners neglect the servicing, the rotor arm will rub against the case back. We see that in a lot of Rolex watches. They are so well made that they will just run and run and run and run, and a lot of owners see that as a sign that you don't need a service in a Rolex, but you do need servicing in any mechanical watch. Rolex, the most common problem is the rotor bearing. You get excess play in the bearing, and the rotor will rub against the movement in the case back, and it will eventually stop winding the watch efficiently. And it's only at that point customers bring the watch to us, but really, to keep your watch in good shape, you should present it a lot sooner. And we get the case off, you can see the dial underneath. There we are, excellent condition, looks like it was made yesterday. A very lovely dial. So normally we start focusing on the movement straight away, but on this one there's quite a lot of preparation that's going to go into this case and bracelet before we do the normal refinishing, because we've got to remove the weld splatter first. This is the original bracelet. There is a bit of wear to the links, but it's not terrible. It's definitely got some service life left in it, and a lot of dirt under there again. Before we do any work to this watch, we are going to put it through an ultrasonic cleaner, just because it has got a lot of dirt in there, and there is quite a lot of work that needs doing. We're going to have to file all the side of this bracelet down, so it's just a bit more pleasant to work on if it's gone through the cleaner first. So the first stage will be the ultrasonic clean. The sides of the bracelet are actually quite bad on this watch. Some of the bracelets very bad. Here we are. You see the dirt coming out. That's 20 minutes worth of ultrasonic cleaning sped up. But there we are, much more pleasant to work with. It still obviously needs a lot of work, but the dirt's gone at least. So with that done, we're going to start removing weld splatter. It's very hard, so we're going to use a diamond file to take it off, and there's a lot of deep scratches in this side of the case in particular, so we're going to bring the surface down with this diamond file. Now you have to do this quite carefully because you don't want to round the edges of the case, so try and keep the file as flat as you can, and we'll basically keep working this until we got a nice surface to do the normal case and bracelet polishing. But yeah, we definitely need to get some of that off first. There we go, that is quite a lengthy process, so we won't show all of it. That'll be several hours of filing before we get to this point where we're on the lathe. Here we are. Now we focus on the movement. You see it's losing over a minute a day. Amplitude's very low, we want that above 270. So yeah, there's a lot of friction in that movement, and we got to beat error as well for good measure, so definitely a watch that's in need of a service, long overdue. Here's the watch under the microscope. You see some dirt in there. It's amazing, you get oyster cased watches, they don't let water in, but you do get dirt in there. And again, we've not added this. This is what you'll find in most watches. Watchmakers will be familiar with this. Yeah. Always with Rolex watches, they stay very bright. The rhodium plating on the movements is absolutely excellent. You'll open watches that have not been open for 20 years and it will look perfect. Now you see around the side where there's that brass, that's basically the rhodium plating being scraped away by the rotor going round. That's what happens when you neglect service windows. So that surface at the side where it's just slightly brass coloured, that's the rhodium plating removed, and that all ends up in your movement, in all the wheels, in all the bearing, the dual bearings for each pivot, and that basically is what brings your amplitude down. You get increased friction from that sort of debris, and the oils also thicken with age as they congeal. So that's why we like to say, especially with this age of Rolex, we say 3 to 5 years service window. You're okay to stretch it to 5 if you don't wear the watch all the time. But yeah, a lot of people will leave it 20, even 30 years before servicing a Rolex, and they do need a lot of parts if you do that. We've had Rolexes in where there's been so much wear through the movement, even the jewels are starting to go olive shaped, and it gets to the point where it needs thousands of pounds worth of spare parts to make the watch run accurately. So onto the movement. First thing we do is get this automatic mechanism out of the way. That'll be put to one side, and it will need new reversers, new rotor bearing, and a good clean as well. And there we are. That's what I say about the rhodium plating. Always looks excellent on Rolex watches. And this is why we focus on Rolex as a repair workshop. The quality is so good. Once you know what you're doing with them, you know the problems to look for, you know the oils to use, the tooling to use. They're a pleasure to work with. Right, now it's time to remove the dial and hands. I use a technique that was shown to me by somebody at the BHI who was a former head of the Rolex workshop in the UK. This is the way they do it at Rolex. You basically tear a clear plastic bag, lay it over the dial and hands, and then use hand levers, and you never damage them if you do that. I've never had a single one damaged with this. It really is the best way to do it. You can buy all sorts of dial protectors and hand removing levers and things, but just the most simple way of doing it is the best. There we are. Absolutely zero damage every time. Here we are into the movement, stripping it down. You might see little, when I do Rolex watches, you'll see little bits of Sharpie in my movement holding trays. That's basically little notes for me to know where the screws go. It's very easy when you're working on watches to mix screws up, and they are quite specific where they need to be. So I just put them on top of the writing in my movement holders. So SLS, for example, means setting lever spring. So I'll put the 2 screws for the setting lever spring on top of the SLS. The rest of the movements in the cleaning machine, and then I'll manually clean the screws with horological essence and pegwood, dry them and then put them back. So there's no way I can mix the screws up, because I was noticing a lot when we get Rolexes in that they've been to other independent watchmakers, not to Rolex but other independent watchmakers. We do see them where the screws are mixed up, and it does affect the working. There's quite a lot of noise outside. We are in the centre of town, so we do get a lot of noise outside the workshop, so if the microphone's picking and hear that up, I do apologise. There we go, continued stripping the watch. That's the support for the date wheel. And then into the keyless works. The camera light's focusing on my screwdrivers rather than the movement. Yeah, all these parts look to be in good order. No problems with any of them. Yeah, there's this crown and stem out. I put that separate. I'll clean that separately, because you do sometimes get quite a bit of dirt trapped under the crown. I don't want that to go into the movement. That's the setting lever. This brass piece here, a very thin bit of brass that was under the setting lever, that's the hack mechanism. In this caliber, there's several times I've rebuilt it all and then found that sat in my movement tray at the end, and had to strip the dial off all the hand setting parts, all the date mechanism. So yeah, it is important to remember to put that back in. You often find that with certain caliber of movements you'll make the same mistake over and over. There's a 1570 where I used to leave the setting lever screw out because it goes under the plate before you build the keyless works, and I went through a period of forgetting to put that in every single time. But the more you get familiar, we do Rolexes all day every day now, so they've become quite routine for us. The more you get familiar, the less you make those silly mistakes. The next thing to look for is the condition of the mainspring. Not so much in this caliber, but in the next caliber, the 3-1 based watches, we have noticed quite a few broken mainsprings. So that if your watch isn't running at all, that's quite often the reason. There we go, all in great condition again. Just check the train, just quickly move it, everything's free. We'll carry on stripping. It is important to strip the watch completely. Some people leave certain parts in place for cleaning, but on Rolex you need to strip all these parts out because you can't oil the center pinion properly without removing it. And you get to that by removing this plate and all these wheels and pinions, so it does need to be fully stripped for servicing. Also, you need to fully strip it so you can inspect all these parts as you rebuild them. So these parts are quite delicate. It is possible for the cleaning machine to break them, so we put them in this small basket within the baskets, and that helps to protect it. You see under that plate there's another plate with 2 screws in. This is the part that it's not possible to oil correctly without fully stripping the watch. That's it, that's the movement completely stripped. We just have to get the mainspring out of the barrel and we're done. There's a little bit of the finishing of the side of the case. And here we are, back to the watch, the movement, sorry. Here's the mainspring. So while I'm doing the movement, my colleague Scott is doing the case and bracelet repolishing, working alongside each other in another part of the workshop. Rolex do use quite a thick black grease inside mainspring barrels, so it looks dirty, but it's not actually dirt, it's the grease. Here we are on the cleaning machine, all the parts going round, and then here we are, nice clean mainspring, ready to go back in. So we put it in with this, it's basically what winds the mainspring back up, and then you can put 3 dots of grease around the inner wall of the barrel. You don't want to oil the spring because you'll get a lower amplitude at the end, because as the oil binds the coils together it will reduce the amount of power it's giving. These modern springs are designed not to need oil or grease on the actual surface of the spring. You do however need some grease on the outside of the barrel wall, so that when the watch is fully wound and the automatic mechanism continues winding the fully wound spring, the outside of the spring needs to slip along the barrel wall, so you have to have just the right grease in just the right amount so that it can slip when it needs to, but not slipping while it's in normal winding. There we are. Now that's fully captive in the mainspring winder, we just let the power off. Now it can be quite tricky to get this part out without the mainspring springing off in your face. I like to lift the cap slightly and just ease it off with a screwdriver. And there we are, it's captive inside, ready to go back into the mainspring barrel. Right, we're on to rebuilding now and oiling as we go. Like I say, we like to inspect the parts as we go. In a well maintained watch you don't normally need too many parts for Rolex. However, as I said, a lot of people neglect the service windows and you can end up needing a lot of parts, so it is important to check them as we go. We use a magscope to check as we go, and you're as you put your wheels and pinions in, you need to use we use cocktail sticks just to lift the wheels and pinions up to check the movement between each jewel and to check that everything's spinning freely, and you have to put a little bit of power through to check that each wheel's moving concentrically on its arbor. You're looking for like up and down movement, eccentric movement of the wheels and pinions. In this watch everything looks okay. There's that hack mechanism, not forgotten it this time, fortunately. And the setting lever which keeps it in place and interacts with the stem. So there's a notch on this setting lever, and that sits in a notch on the stem, and that's what keeps it in place. When you're pushing a button on the other side of the movement to release the stem, you're lifting that setting lever up. That's the yoke and yoke spring gone in. I like to hold springs in place as I fit them. So I hold it with my left hand with a cocktail stick, adjust it with the screwdriver, just slide it in basically. It stops them springing off. I put in the pallet bridge in, we're on the other side of the movement now. So when I do pallet bridges, I like to line everything up, then make sure that both pivots are sat in place. I check it with an eyeglass and hold it in place with a cocktail stick, and then put the screws in. And by doing that, you make sure it's not moving about as you're putting screws in. I've had them before where it lifts slightly, you don't notice it, you screw it down and you snap the pivot on the end of the pallet. So yeah, always hold it down in place. Now, I like to use a blower as I go as well, because even if you're working cleanly, you can get little bits of dust and debris in movements as you go. So as I'm building, I'm constantly blowing the watch off with a dust removal tool and making sure it stays nice and clean. So that's the pallets in place, a little bit of wind put on. Now we can put the balance in. I like to put a little power on before I put the balance in, because it lets you know it's in the right place when it starts running. And just line that up carefully. Just get the notch on the bottom of the balance in line with the pallets, and there we go, starts running. What to do is secure the balance in place with one screw. It's a good idea at this point to check your watch for timekeeping and amplitude. You'll do the final regulation at the end, but it's good to spot anything before you carry on building. Right, so here I've built the date mechanism, and we've got everything in place, doing a bit of testing, and the quick set doesn't work. We need a couple of replacement parts. It turned out in this watch it was the spring that locates the date wheel, and this little quick set selector that's just, you see that part spinning now, to replace that. Just a bit too much wear on it for it to change the date star. Isn't the same movement again, you see how it should work. There. So to help me diagnose the fault, I actually removed the parts from this donor movement and put them straight over, so we know which parts we need, and then we can check it's all working properly and then order the replacements. And there we are, moving much more freely. That all back in place for another test. And it did actually work with those two parts replaced, and that's the movement service done, apart from a bit of regulating at the end and a bit of oiling of the jewels. I like to oil the jewels on the opposite side of the movement at the end of the service, just to minimise the risk of any dirt getting in the oils. There we go, and that's that quick set working now. So on to oiling. This is the anchor block on the top of the balance. Just slide it back in, and then we just put this shock setting down. This is basically what protects your balance staff if you drop your watch. It's like a suspension in a car. There we are, running nicely. Much better amplitude now as well. There's my colleague fitting the hands and doing final quality control. It's important to get the hands right on these. Everything parallel to the dial and parallel to each other. Especially when you've got 4 hands, you've got very little room to work with between the dial and the bottom of the glass. Each hand has a certain section to run in, and if they're not parallel, perfectly parallel, they'll touch each other, or the dial, or the glass. Quite often you do see this model of Rolex come in and there's a ring around the inside where the hour hand is tracked along the dial. People push it too far down, so that is something to watch out for. Just making sure everything's located at 12 so that everything lines up on the hours perfectly. It's very hard to video what you're doing and actually do the job properly. So he's blocking the view a bit there, but we do have to prioritise the watch and make sure we're doing that properly while we're videoing. And there we are, all fitted. So that's the movement done, ready to go in its freshly refinished case. We've got a new glass, genuine Rolex glass, and we're keeping the old bezel. So we will still have a watch that looks its age. It's not overly restored, but we got rid of that unreasonable amount of damage that we had going on from the weld spots. It's a watch that still looks appropriate with its age. It's not completely stripped of its character, but it's in a much better, more wearable state. Here we are, we've got that 280 degree amplitude. That's great for a watch at this age. We're up to 290. Beat error's vastly reduced. The watch at this point, 0.1, will self-start, and we've got it showing a -9 second error. Our timing machine has an offset of 8 seconds, so that's actually -1.8 seconds a day. They're just putting the circular grain back on the case back. Because this is not a part we're cutting or anything like that, that movement when it's on the wax chuck is okay. We're just looking to do a finish in here, so it's cosmetic, so we'll get that nice circular grain in by doing this. We're not going to go too far with this though. We don't want to strip away too much. I'm just going to basically take the weld splatter off. There we are, you see we left some of those scratches in place. A bit too deep to remove, you're going to start taking away too much material. So we like to draw the line between going too far, making a watch look overly refinished, and restoring some usability to it. Yeah, I do think an old watch should look old, but there are levels to that. And there we are, all that weld splatter gone, those thick, those big deep scratches gone too. We are putting the bezel back on. It wasn't rotating when it came in, but it turns out that there was nothing wrong with it. It was just full of dirt. So by the time we cleaned it, refitted it, we've got the original bezel insert, been with the watch since the day it was made, and the watch, as I say, still looks its age, but in a nice way. And there we are, we've got that rotation back. It's a very nice watch. So all that remains is to reunite the watch with its freshly refinished bracelet, and we've also fully regulated it, and then we'll put it on testing to make sure it is keeping good time, using all its power reserve, and none of the hands are catching or anything like that. So we'll test it now for 7 days after the service, and then it's back on its owner's wrist in about 2 weeks. And this service, our labour on it is £395. So it's not a bad deal for a good quality service. And we do just basically specialise in Rolex, so we have become quite expert at it. We have tightened up those end links a little bit. They were rattling. I think if you go back to the start of the video, you'll see a gap between the end link and the case. So basically we've tightened up the end links and put new spring bars in. And this watch has definitely benefited from a bit of attention. Without, I know I said it a few times, but it's something I do believe in, without stripping away the character of the watch. There we are, all secure. Fitting the case much better. Great looking watch. Much better, very nicely presented. So yep, thank you for watching. I do have a very sore throat at the moment, so excuse me and my voice, but I think we got through it. And there we are, that's in a Wolfwinder. Very nice watch, working great, keeping great time, and it looks original.